وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر wnzk راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on wnzk 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning. President Trump may have made an unwise decision by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He could and should have extracted a proportionate concession from Israel in return for moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. The Palestinians understandably reacted in anger, but they also may have made an unwise choice by boycotting talks with the U.S. and by looking for an alternative broker for the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Why unwise? Because the question is whether there is an alternative broker. So in today's program, I will discuss this question and others with a group of distinguished guests. Mr. Arikat, Washington Bureau Chief of Quds Daily Newspaper. Mr. David Finkel, editor of the journal Against the Current. We will be joined later in the program by Dr. Khalil Jahshan, director of the Arab Center in Washington. For our audience who would like to participate in the discussion, please call us on 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. My first question to both Mr. Arikat and Mr. Finkel, and let me start with Mr. Finkel. What is your take, Mr. Finkel, on Mr. Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Well, good morning. I'm very glad to be here with you. I think that we have to understand that Trump's declaration on Jerusalem is first and foremost, it's something he did to gain the favor and support of his evangelical Christian base in the United States, and also the most right-wing elements in the American Jewish community. Most of the American Jewish community doesn't support Trump at all, but it's the far right wing that he's playing to. Secondly, we've seen just recently that he stepped up the timetable on actually physically moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. I believe the timing of that is to do a favor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under investigation in Israel for 3 or 4 different corruption and bribery charges, on some of which the police have actually recommended that Netanyahu be prosecuted. So I think that Trump is doing Netanyahu a big favor. And finally, as you may have seen, the American casino billionaire Sheldon Adelson has said that he will personally finance the construction of a new U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. Under normal circumstances, that kind of intervention by an American billionaire would be considered shocking and highly, highly irregular. In the present circumstances with this administration, nothing seems irregular. So I believe that those are the things that are going on here.
You talked about the right-wing Jewish community. Tell us more about the composition of the Jewish community in the U.S. You said most of them did not vote or did not support Mr. Trump in the first place. So why is it so important for him to appease to a minority within the Jewish community?
Well, okay, 75 to 80% of the Jewish community in the United States typically votes Democratic, and that doesn't really change very much. If anything, Donald Trump is less popular among American Jews than most Republicans the most Republican presidents for very understandable reasons, because of Trump's connection with the alt-right, Steve Bannon, the march in Charlottesville organized by neo-Nazis. So this kind of thing is repellent to most of the American Jewish community. However, there are 20% or so of American Jews who vote Republican, some of the more religiously orthodox folks who align themselves on some issues with the Christian, religious right, and some of the most wealthy, elements in the Jewish community, like Sheldon Adelson and people like that, line themselves up for reasons of economic interest, the way most of the 1%, as we call it in American life, tend to line up with the Republicans for economic reasons. So it's a sort of a natural thing. But part of the Trump strategy, part of the Republican strategy in general, is by being extraordinarily pro-Israel. I would put in quotation marks, but by being seen as pro-Israel and aligned with the right wing in Israeli politics and the settler movement and so forth, they try to increase their base a little bit within the American Jewish community. So it's partly ethnic politics, but it's partly also, I think, that Israel, the state of Israel with its enormous military apparatus, plays a big role in what I call American global management, that is, of the efforts of the United States to control and police whole parts of the world, the Middle East in particular. And Israel is seen as America's great strategic partner in this venture, so that gets into the foreign policy area as well.
Mr. Saeed Arikat, what is your take on Mr. Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Well, for one thing, first of all, thank you for having me on the program, and I'm glad to be joining your other guests. But no matter how you look at it, it is ill-advised, and it lacks historical perspective, because there is an international consensus on Jerusalem, and it's been there since 1949. And that's why no one has really dealt with this issue until there is some sort of a final status agreement between Palestinians and Israelis. So although one would understand the motive behind Mr. Trump's decision and how he came about it, it is still ill-advised. And in fact, I'm a bit, and everybody else around this town, are perplexed because the outrage has not been, let's say, at the level that it should have been, because this is really a very dangerous step taken by the Trump administration, and it basically nixes or dismisses U.S.-owned commitments. I mean, the United States has been committed to keep Jerusalem until the end as a part of the final status issues, along with the creation of a Palestinian state and resolving the refugee issues and so on. So by backing away from that, Mr. Trump has backed away from U.S. commitments that were very clear. They were most starkly enunciated in a letter sent signed to by former Secretary of State James Baker in 1991, the Madrid conference and so on. There's a letter of understanding. And then every president after that has adhered to the same thing. I mean, I understand there are some political expediency, probably as some sort of a dynamo behind this motive, but it is definitely ill-advised. And I don't think it will work, because things will not change on the ground. Mr. Trump can say all he wants, that I'm taking Jerusalem off the table, but the fact of the matter, there remains 380,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, everything about it is Palestinian and Arabic and so on. So you can't just by saying, I'm going to take it off the table, that does not happen. By moving the U.S. Embassy there, that does not change the realities on the ground. So you still have a very volatile situation. This could be a powder keg that could ignite the whole region.
Mr. Arikat, Mr. Trump says that his move on Jerusalem does not define the final lines or boundaries of where Israel begins and ends, and there is room for negotiations over that issue. How do you respond?
Well, I find that to be disingenuous, because if that was the case, then Mr. Trump could have said, look, I recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and I recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of the future Palestinian state, which he did not. And then, there's been misleading all along throughout this whole process. They said, we're moving to the embassy, but nothing changes. Then they said that, it's going to take 3-4 years. Then, as we learned last week, they're moving it into the consulate, which has always served as some sort of a diplomatic mission to the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. So there's been an element of deception and disingenuous. And basically, Mr. Trump is going along with policies that are basically designed and forwarded by the likes of Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister himself, the settlement movement, definitely Mr. David Friedman, who is the ambassador to Israel, the American ambassador, who's basically conducting himself as an ambassador of the settlers to the United States. So that is the agenda that he's following. I understand that the team that has assumed responsibility for Middle East peace, Jared Kushner, David Friedman, Jason Greenblatt, they are very close and have always been supportive of the settler movement. So it is only natural that we can see that in their mind and in the mind of the right-wing Israeli government, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, in their mind, they feel that this is it. I mean, this is a moment in once and for all the Palestinian cause as we know it.
When we come back, I will ask both my guests about the idea of Jerusalem as a capital for two states at the same time, after the break.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing Jerusalem and Mr. Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to the city. Mr. David Finkel, editor of the Journal Against the Current, and Mr. Saeed Arikat, Washington Bureau Chief of Quds Daily Newspaper. Mr. Finkel, what is your take on the idea, on the proposal that Jerusalem should be a capital for two states, a Palestinian state and Israel? Now, I understand, if I'm not wrong, that since the 1990s, the U.S. official position on the issue was that Jerusalem indeed would be a capital for Palestine and a capital for Israel at the same time.
Well, it's conceivable. It's something that it's basically what the Israeli peace movement and the Palestinian Authority have been talking about and calling for many years now. I think in the present circumstances, it's very unlikely. First of all, I do not think that the United States, any administration, has really been serious about pushing that, about actually forcing Israel to make the concessions that would make a Palestinian state possible and viable. But as a matter of fact, if you look at what has been going on recently, what's actually been recently revealed in the press, Jared Kushner and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Sultan, who's taking over, Salman, who's taking over the reins of power in Saudi Arabia, have been developing a scheme to impose on the Palestinian Authority a series of a so-called solution, which would be a bunch of disconnected population areas with a pseudo-capital in a tiny little suburb called Abu Dis. This is completely unviable, and no Palestinian or Palestinian leadership could possibly ever accepted. It would be worse than the South African Bantustan schemes. So the idea of Jerusalem as a capital of two states side by side is a nice idea, but it would require an absolute transformation in U.S. policy, in Israeli internal politics, and frankly in the entire global attitude toward the issue. So I'm not at all hopeful about it.
Mr. Arikat, before I get back to you on this same issue, we have on the line our friend Jerry Habba with a question. Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Dr. Atef Abdel Gawad, taking my call. Good morning to you. Good morning to your distinguished guest. My question to your guest, Ms. Nikki Haley, United States Ambassador, said when most of the countries vote against recognize Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, by the United States administration and President Donald Trump, she said that our government, the United States government, will deal with all those countries who they vote against us. That means the United States will cut aid from any countries vote against this decision. My question is this gentleman considered as a blackmail to these countries? I would love to hear the answer, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Who would like to answer? Mr. Arikat, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, that is basically blackmail. What is blackmail? You're telling people, if you do this, I'm going to punish you by cutting off aid. So there's an element of extortion right there. But, it is really a lot of bluster, because I don't think the United States will go ahead and cut off aid, for instance, from its allies like Jordan or Egypt, where a great deal of aid is being sent. And these countries have been in the forefront in opposing the Trump move and in supporting that East Jerusalem would be the capital of the Palestinian state, the future Palestinian state. But that is, that tells us a lot of things. It tells us that this administration, first of all, is really lacking in terms of diplomatic acumen. They're not, Ms. Haley is not someone who has been steeped in foreign policy. Her foreign policy is basically ad hoc. Much of it comes in the form of talking points from AIPAC, from Danny Danon of the the Israeli ambassador at the UN. So she's, and the same thing with her boss. Mr. Trump is not someone who has been, quite in command of foreign policy issues. He goes by feelings and instinct and on the whim. He feels that you can make deals by give and take, so to speak, with total disregard to the historical context. So, yes, I mean, that shows that first of all, the government, in this case, the ambassador and the administrations, are not equipped to deal with such a complex issue. That's one. Second, there's a great deal of frustration because they saw that overwhelmingly the majority of the countries in the world actually adhere to the principle that there should be two states for two people, with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And third, that they will resort to these sort of undiplomatic measures to punish people that do not go along with their own view, their own vision of how things ought to be. And as we have seen, they did cut off aid, but from probably the weakest of all, which is the Palestinian refugees. But until now, we have not seen the United States cut off aid from countries, 128 countries that supported the Palestinians and voted against the United States in the General Assembly on the 21st of December.
Mr. Arikat, you just heard Mr. Finkel saying that the idea of Jerusalem as capital for two states is unviable, is not viable. So when the Palestinians say Jerusalem is the eternal capital for the Palestinian people or for Palestine, so what do they mean here? Do they mean to kick out Israel out of Jerusalem, or to keep Jerusalem as divided east and west?
It's exactly that. I mean, the world recognizes East Jerusalem as occupied territory. That is enshrined in UN Resolution 242. It is enshrined in 338 and 476 and 478. So there are so many resolutions that actually time and again, emphasize the fact that East Jerusalem, which is my town, by the way, I am from Abu Dis, as a matter of fact, this is really occupied territory. So everybody agrees to that, and if you agree that this is occupied by force, then you agree that this occupation must end at one point. So yes, I mean, in theory, it can work out. If there's ever an agreement on the two-state solution, this can work out quite well. It's Jerusalem, for all practical purposes, is a divided city. I mean, and if you sort of just look beyond the pomp and circumstance and the theatrics from time to time, the fact is that East Jerusalem remains Arab, remains Palestinian in every little aspect. So that is conceivable. If there's agreement, if there's an international agreement, if there's ever an international conference, for instance, that is going to pursue vigorously the two-state solution. But I agree with your guest, with Mr. Finkel, that currently the situation is very complex and not likely to have any kind of movement towards that resolution.
Okay, Mr. Finkel, any comment?
Well, I agree entirely about the U.S. Trump administration blackmail. It's very ugly. It's the way this administration does business, although I must say that it's not terribly different in substance from the way previous Democratic and Republican administrations have acted, although most of them do it with more sophistication. With the Trump administration, the threats are openly thuggish, but they're not going to cut off military aid to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and so forth, just as Mr. Arikat has said.
We have more questions to discuss when we come back after the break.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600. Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing Mr. Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Dr. Khalil Jahshan just joined us. Dr. Jahshan is director of the Arab Center in Washington. We also have with us Mr. David Finkel, editor of the journal Against the Current, and Mr. Saeed Arikat, Washington bureau chief of Quds Daily Newspaper. Mr. Jahshan, good morning to you. Mr. Trump's decision about Jerusalem, does it help make the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the resolution of that conflict, easier or more difficult?
Good morning, Atef. It's good to be with you, and it's an honor to also share this program with my friends Saeed Arikat and David Finkel. And the question is very important to discuss, particularly for your audience in the Midwest, where there is, I guess, a lot of concern about what that policy implies and what it means, practically speaking. Trump's ill-advised decision to change U.S. policy on Jerusalem, I think, made peace in the Middle East more distant. Not necessarily that peace was just around the corner. As a matter of fact, as you well know, the so-called peace process has been dead for a long time. And the previous administration kind of washed its hands off, even though it had maybe a more conventional position regarding peacemaking in the Middle East, but it was not successful at working with the parties and kind of succumbed, if you will, to Israeli intransigence and refusal to proceed forward with any serious territorial compromise. But this administration, particularly, first of all, toying with an item that is a kind of a core item, if you will. It's a final status issue, as they call it in peace processing lingo. Several administrations over the years have held the same consistent position with regards to Jerusalem, and now Mr. Trump feels he can diffuse the issue naively and somehow take it off the table. You can't take a core issue of any conflict out of off the table, particularly by someone who claims to be the best negotiator in the history of mankind. He should have known better, and his advisors should have known better. It is understood, of course, that some of them objected to this step, and he viewed it more of a domestic kind of campaign promise. But frankly speaking, in practical terms, it made the issue of peace between Israelis and Palestinians more distant, more difficult, mostly because it basically put the U.S. in a position that negates its previous, if you will, commitments. It violates international law, as we have seen at UN votes recently. The whole world community stood against his decision. And practically speaking, in terms of a country that arrogated to itself almost the permanent right to mediate Middle East peace, taking sides with one of the parties proved that the U.S. Is not a fair arbiter in this conflict and cannot proceed forward as the sole legitimate sponsor of Middle East peace.
We have more questions to discuss when we come back after the break.
بدأناه معكم وعاهدناكم على أن نستمر بمزيد من المتعة والعروض الحصرية على قناتي زي ألوان وزي أفلام. زي ألوان هي أول وأكبر قناة مسلسلات عربية هندية في أمريكا. أضخم الإنتاجات، مسلسلات حصرية، ومع زي أفلام فأنتم على موعد مع مغامرة جديدة كل يوم لاكتشاف سحر بوليوود. تابعوا حصريا قناتي زي ألوان وزي أفلام الآن في أمريكا على ديش نتورك وسلينج تي في.
أسواق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أورشارد ليك في مدينة فارمينغتون هيلز ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلة كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري أوت، جميع أنواع المعجنات، وأيضا صواني الكمبو المشكلة والصمون الحار. لحوم حلال الجالية العربية والإسلامية، الملحمة بإدارة قصاب الجالية المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 أورشارد ليك في مدينة فارمينغتون هيلز أو اتصلوا بهم على 248-476-0300. أسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم، اتصلوا على 248-476-0300. أسواق زمزم للمعاملة الراقية وكرم الضيافة عنوان.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. Dr. Khalil Jahshan, the Palestinians understandably reacted in anger, and so now they are calling for a different, honest broker for the peace process other than the U.S. How practical, how realistic are they in that call?
First of all, the Palestinian reaction to the steps undertaken by the Trump administration with regards to Jerusalem, I think that whatever it is, anger or dissatisfaction, it is more than justified, considering the seriousness of this step and its negative impact on the prospects for peace in the region. Now, to be precise, the Palestinian leadership did not call for replacing the U.S. as a sponsor of Middle East peace in the future. Basically, what the official position of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Palestinian leadership known as the PA inside Palestine has been that the U.S., by taking this step, proved that it is not equipped to continue to be the sole, if you will, sponsor of the process. In other words, what they are calling for is not excluding the U.S. from sponsoring the process, but they are resenting the exclusivity of the U.S. and preventing other parties from helping with the process. So that's what they are calling for. They are calling for an expanded new mechanism for peacemaking in the Middle East that might include the UN, that might include European countries, that might include other powers, regional or international, including, for example, just the last 48 hours, they invited Brazil to take part in the process. They invited all UN Security Council members to participate in the process. So it's very important to make that clear. Regardless of whether it's the first version that you mentioned in your question or my explanation of it, that's not going to be easy, frankly, because the U.S. has been practicing hegemony over peacemaking in the Middle East for so long. When you look back, not only the Oslo process going back to the early 90s, but the U.S. role goes back to 1939. You know, there has been, people tend to forget that we've had more than 70 peacemaking attempts in the Middle East since the original partition plan and the Peel Commission way back in 1939. Every administration throughout that period has toyed with attempting to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Palestine question. So there is a whole history. As students of history, we need to look at that whole history and see whether the U.S. alone, hogging, if you will, manipulating the process for its own interest, subjecting it to its own bias to one of the parties, only Israel, has contributed to the failure of all these attempts when you look at that cemetery of peace proposals in the Middle East. So it behooves us to look at other options. So expanding, if you will, finding a new mechanism is doable. Replacing the U.S., I would say, might be very difficult for one clear reason. U.S. hegemony is still there. The U.S. will refuse to abdicate its role. Number two, the fact that Israel feels so protected by the biased U.S. position at the peace table, if people return to the negotiating table, that they will also resent and refuse to abide by any change in the sponsorship. So the Palestinians do face a predicament. On the one hand, they are justified to ask for a change. On the other hand, it's not going to be easy, considering, as I said, the control by Washington over the United Nations Security Council, over the NATO, over the Quartet. So we'll have a difficult time, if you will, changing from the current circumstances, which has proved to be a failure, to an expanded mechanism to manage Middle East peace.
Let me take the same question to Mr. Finkel. Given the fact that we had the Quartet for Middle East peace, which includes the UN, the European Union, and Russia, together with the U.S., and nothing came out of that. In fact, I don't know whatever happened to that quartet. So how realistic is it for the Palestinians now to call for an expanded mechanism for the peace process?
Okay, well, first, I agree that it's important to look at the history, going way back, and we've had the last quarter century now of a peace process which has been all process and no peace, while everything has, while the entire situation has deteriorated. I believe that the Palestinian leadership is actually quite right to say that there has to be an expanded framework, and I believe President Abbas called for an international conference, and I think that that's the only way to go. But I have to make an additional observation, which is painful but true. Everybody listening to this radio program cares a great deal about Jerusalem, Palestine, and the future of Israel and Palestine, and so forth. That's why people are listening to this program. We sometimes make the mistake of thinking that because we care about the issue, that it's it's a very important issue to the United States government because it's an important issue to us. I think it's very clear that to the United States government, and this goes for both administrations of both political parties, the issue of Palestine is not that important. If it can be solved easily, fine. But it's not something that they're going to invest a lot of political capital in. It's not something that they're going to put a lot of pressure on Israel, because basically the fact that Israel is overwhelmingly powerful works for them. And that will not change until there is a change in the international political situation. It was notorious. I mean, we know that Donald Trump loves Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why he's accelerating the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, as I said before, to help Netanyahu out when he's under all these corruption charges. President Obama and Netanyahu hated each other. That was also notorious. But it didn't make a lot of real substantive difference. When the Obama administration criticized Israeli settlement expansion, and the Israelis responded furiously, the U.S. administration backed away because they won't put any. It's not worth them putting any muscle into. And I also have to say, it's very painful that the catastrophe that's going on right now in Gaza, which people listening to this program probably know something about, that Gaza is becoming uninhabitable. It doesn't even register in the U.S. Media for the most part because it's drowned out by the horrible catastrophes going on in Syria and Yemen, which is underreported, and South Sudan and places like this. So I think we have to understand the reality that for the United States government, the issue of Palestine and Jerusalem and so forth, as much as we care about it, is really a third-rate issue, not a first-rate one. That's painful to say that, but we have to take that reality into account.
Mr. Saeed Arikat, as you know, the peace process started with an international conference back in the 1990s, convened by President George Bush Sr. However, immediately after that, the process was reduced to be simply dominated exclusively by the U.S. In light of that fact, how realistic is it for the Palestinians to come back today to say, let's go back to an international conference?
Well, it's not a choice that the Palestinians are making lightly. I mean, the options are very limited. The United States has completely taken the side of Israel, not only of Israel, but taken the side of the most extreme right-wing Israeli government. It has taken the side of the settlement movement. It has moved its embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Jerusalem as capital of Israel. You know, it has taken amazing steps in the last few months that basically sort of preempt its own effort at mediating a process. So what should the Palestinians do? They do have some options. They must go to the international community. It's not only just organizing a peace conference, but there are also all kinds of organizations that they can use. They can certainly take the Israeli occupation before the International Criminal Court of Justice. They could pursue that. There are some real cases that they can prosecute, and they can sort of highlight the war crimes of the occupation, the settlement processes, and all these are war crimes. So there are a number of options at the disposal of the Palestinians, along with the fact that the Palestinians are there. They're not going anywhere. At the end of the day, they are the most important factor. I mean, they may be perceived as weak. They may have been projected under the current leadership on the international scene as being weak, but in fact, they hold very strong cards. They are there. They're the ones that it's the aggrieved party, but it's also able to resist the occupation and by peaceful means, as we have seen last July with the Aqsa Mosque, as we have seen with the churches in the last couple of days, and so on. So to suggest that the Palestinians are, sort of defanged and weak and so on is not true. And the Palestinians do have a great deal of support in the world. It is really, if you looked at how the United States found itself, let's say, on the 18th of December of last year in the Security Council, when it was voted 14-1 in the Security Council, so it was isolated. The same thing that 2 days later in the General Assembly. So I disagree with the notion that it is a third-rate issue. It is not. it's an important issue. The United States feels now, or Israel feels now, that the U.S. is completely on its side, and that's why it can do whatever it wants. But this cannot go on because at one point the world is not going to tolerate this insolence by the U.S., this insolence by Israel, and this occupation cannot go on. I mean, this an apartheid-like situation, the violations of basic human rights for the Palestinians will simply not stand. So it is an issue that will continue to be there and will continue to be with us, and in fact, very starkly so until it is resolved.
Mr. Dr. Khalil Jahshan, how wise it is for the Palestinians to boycott any talks with the U.S., given the fact that the U.S. historically has been in control of, let's say, their fate, simply put?
I'm not sure that the Palestinian leadership is attempting to boycott anything. They are simply trying to nudge the process forward for the benefit of all parties concerned. They're not asking, as I said earlier, they're not asking basically for the exclusion of the U.S. and for refusing to participate. They are basically looking for substantive change. I mean, right now we are discussing the issue of Jerusalem. Frankly, leaks over the past several weeks, including the most recent leak just less than 12 hours ago, regarding the content of the so-called ultimate deal, or the deal of the century, as the administration would like to call it. There are even worse issues that the administration is about to spring on the Palestinians and on us in general, American citizens who are interested in achieving peace for the benefit of all parties in the region. And that includes, for example, not only giving up on the Jerusalem issue, but giving up on a more important issue, frankly, which is the refugee issue, and dictating the outcome of this so-called peace process. It can't be a peace process without free Palestinian participation. It cannot be a peace process without dealing fairly and squarely with the issue of the refugees. It cannot be a peace process without settling the issue of Jerusalem. So we're in for additional, frankly, surprises by the administration that will pop on the radar screen over the next maybe few weeks.
Okay, I have about 2 minutes left, and I would like both Mr. Finkel and Mr. Arikat to give me separately their prediction of what is going to happen next in the peace process. Mr. Finkel.
Very quickly, in the short term, I believe the situation is going to deteriorate further, I'm sorry to say. I believe Mr. Arikat's point is exactly right, that the most important factor is that the Palestinian people are not going to go away, that there is resistance on the ground. That's what we need to support. And ultimately, that will be the decisive factor, and that's the hope.
Mr. Arikat.
Well, I agree that in the short term, it's going to be dire. It's going to be very difficult, especially in the absence of Palestinian unity and in the absence of a coherent Palestinian policy forward, so to speak. You must have a plan forward. You must have vision. I think they need to undo what they have been doing all along and basically have a strategy that is inclusive. It includes all Palestinian political factions and move forward. And you begin by solidifying your base on the ground by reviewing and reevaluating the kind of agreement that you've had with this occupying power, Israel, and then how you should move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Saeed Arikat. Thank you, Mr. David Finkel. Thank you, Dr. Khalil Jahshan. And I will see you the first Friday next month. Goodbye.